Thank you all for being here, and all my gratitude goes, of course, to Gabriel for accepting to do this conversation here. As part of the UBS Artist Talk, which is a joint format which the Fondation Bayerler and UBS have organized since 2017, initiated by the director of the Fondation Bayerler, Sam Keller, who is here today. And I want to thank Sam and, of course, Isabella Mora and the team at Fondation Bayerler, as well as also Gabriela Soni from UBS, who is here today, and the whole team there. And of course, all the thanks to Eugenio Lopez. And congratulations to Eugenio, to all the teams here at the museum, to David Chipperfield for the 10th anniversary of this extraordinary museum. We wanted to thank also Monica and Pepe Curi from Curi Mansuto for all the help with organizing this talk. And of course, thank you all for being here today. It's actually also exactly 30 years that Gabriel and I recorded the first conversation. I had just made my driver's license, and we did it in a car. It was a car interview in Paris, and we've since then recorded many different conversations. Of course, we worked on 2 shows at the Musée d'Art Moderne together, the Migrateur project in '95, and then the show Clinton is Innocent in 1998, which actually has to do also what we were going to discuss today, because it's kind of an exhibition as a park. Because Gabriel suggested this wonderful idea that today we're going to talk about public art in Gabriel's practice. We had yesterday the amazing experience, very deep experience for 6 hours to experience the Proyecto Chapultepec, and that's going to be a main part of the conversation here. And before I ask the first question, I think it would be wonderful if you give all a very, very warm welcome to the amazing Gabriel Orozco. Now, Gabriel, yesterday when we talked about public art, I kept thinking of an encounter I had in 1993 when I actually went to see your amazing project at MoMA. It was your first show in New York, Home Run. And the same day I saw this project, I went to see the late Helen Levitt, who was very old then. She lived from 1913 to 2009, the legendary filmmaker, photographer. And she kind of surprisingly didn't want to talk that much about photography, because I had expected it to be an interview on photography. But she really wanted to talk about public art. She told me the whole story of her conversations with Walker Evans and Dorothea Lange and Gordon Parks about the Farm Security Administration, this extraordinary photography project which was part of the Roosevelt Plan. She talked about the sense of community, about this whole idea of public art, and we discussed a lot about John Dewey and this idea. Of course, John Dewey as a philosopher was extremely influential. There were kind of 2 main influences on this Roosevelt Plan art projects. There was Dewey's philosophy, and of course, the Mexican muralists. Diego Rivera and the Mexican muralists were a very big inspiration. And Dewey talked about this idea of bringing art into daily life, about connecting art and society. And in the book, Art as Experience, of course, there's this whole idea that the development of the museum, on the one hand, is very important as a proper home for the work of art, but it also promoted the idea that actually art is apart from common life. So Dewey, in a way, talked about the necessity to recreate a continuity between the refined, what he called the refined, intensified form of expression. That's what he called art, a refined, intensified form of expression, which he attributed to the work of art, and then the everyday events that form our experience. And I always felt that that's really what I experienced that same day when I went to see Home Run. And when we spoke yesterday, you said that for you, it was kind of a muralism with other means. Can you tell us maybe about this very early public artwork you created for MoMA?
With pleasure. Well, thank you very much for coming to listen to this. I think the microphone is better a bit. Can you hear there? Okay, perfect.
Was it okay before, or difficult to hear? Okay, good.
So yes, when I was planning, when they invited me to do the project at MoMA Project Room in '93, at that time I just arrived in New York a year before, and most of my work I was doing was in the streets, was with my bicycle, we have some images here. We are gonna do this loop of images of different works. But that type of work in the supermarkets, with moving the cats and the cat canned food on top of the watermelons, with my bicycle in the streets, taking a lot of photographs. And when I developed my idea and the approach I wanted to take in the MoMA space for my project, I remember that probably 3 weeks before the opening, I asked the curator at the time, Lynn Selevansky, if it was possible that we deliver oranges to the neighbors in front of the MoMA so they could place the oranges in their windows and we could see them from the museum, and also that we need to refresh the oranges every week so they can use the oranges for their orange juice or to consume the oranges, and reinstall the piece for the duration of the project. Of course, for the logistic of a museum such as MoMA, this was a very difficult task, but the curator managed to every week deliver a box of oranges to the neighbors in front. Some of them were very happy to participate. Some of them, they were not in their apartment at the time. But we have a set of almost half a block of 53rd Street with oranges on the windows. And for me, at the time, well, still today, was a way of making a transition between private-public space, between permanent or ephemeral interventions in the museum, but also in the everyday life, and a reflection on things that I was interested at the time, like scale was important for me. At the same year, I did a photograph of the World Trade Center with the puddle before, and I call it An Island into an Island. I think the photo is also there. And that was the kind of interaction I was experimenting with the public life in New York, and in relation with my work with some senses or some practices of sculpture in the open field, let's say, without trying to replicate land art or conceptual art just as a way of behaving in the everyday of my life, but also in relation with a new city for me at the time, but also in connection with the public, the possible new public, new spectator without expectations that can come and have a public experience in the community spaces that, as you know, there we have less and less those public or community spaces for experiencing art in the public sphere. Of course, museums like this one, or like MoMA at the time and today, they're one of the few spaces that we can have to share as artists or experiences. But then the practice of sculpture for me has been, since then, very important to make it in small scale, large scale, but always connected to the time and space of the public exchange of language and art.
Thank you so much. And you said yesterday that this work for MoMA is muralism with other means. And, you know, as we're going to talk about Chapultepec, we're going to talk about public art, I think it would be interesting to hear a little bit about that. Why muralism with other means, and about your relationship to muralism in relation to public art.
Yeah, because I didn't answer your question, no?
No, you did. You answered half of the question. And of course, we are so honored that Benjamin Buchloh is here. His interview, I was looking again, actually this week, the incredible conversation Benjamin did with you at the Guggenheim. For those of you who haven't seen it, you can see it online. It's a great inspiration. And I hear also that Benjamin and you had a conversation on muralism. Then we spoke about it yesterday. So it would be great to hear about that.
Yeah, thank
muralism with other means.
Okay. Yes, well, of course, you know, in my life, I grew up, and I am still very, very fond of the muralists and very interested always. But then when I start not to do painting so much, and I thought that, well, my father itself, he's the third generation muralist, so the spaces for muralism, they were getting close and close. So at the time, I thought myself that this was a possibility of intervening a wall, a window, a street, making a kind of sculptural graffiti, if you want to call it like that, because it's a way of just thinking in public space, in mural, in a wall, in a surface, in a landscape, that in the urban space you can activate through art. Of course, muralism did a lot of tries with perspective, tridimensionality, with mixed materials, with relief also. But I just wanted to, have a kind of conversation with that possibility that at some point during the first half of the 20th century, murals were, including in New York, there were many mural interventions by Americans and Mexicans and all over the world, people in different buildings. But then at some point, public interventions in the space were mostly related to sculptures in different plazas or spaces confined for monuments. And also the idea of monumentability, but not in the sense of historical monumentability or memory of historical events or people, but just about the everyday and the spaces that we can perceive as monumental in a different sense, not as the monument, but as the monumental happening in the everyday life we are experiencing. Because we are living with monuments. We have all these monuments around. And sometimes they are a bit oppressive, most of the times perhaps. But at the same time, we are living through monumental parks with amazing streets. We are also building up in our circulation in the everyday life, the monument of our life in the public sphere. So I think I was thinking all that. That is a kind of answer.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Now, yesterday, when we spent time in Chapultepec, I was also kind of reminded of our early conversation in the 90s about your exhibitions as landscapes and parks. We worked together on a big show in 98 with Suzanne Paget at the Musée d'Art Moderne de la Ville de Paris. And at the time, you actually described the exhibition as a landscape, as a promenade. And you say that that's true for many of your installations. No moon trees in 96, even ventilators, or also the ping pong table with the pond, like a fountain. So this sort of relationship in these installations already with architecture and public space. Can you talk a little bit about that and to kind of how you made exhibitions an experience, as you once told me, almost like walking in a forest?
Yes, it's very true. I always treat the exhibition space like a landscape. I'm always trying to generate different levels of perception, long distance, short distance, and opening spaces. And even as you mentioned, the show in the Museum of Modern Art in Paris was generally I leave the spaces quite open. I don't fragment the space except if there is a reason to do rooms for transitioning the space. So the walking exhibition as a landscape or as a promenade has been important for me. As I tried in the New York, it was called a project room, but I did it in the whole museum and the garden and beyond the garden. So it became a landscape of an exhibition or the relationship with the landscape. In the Museum of Modern Art, I did a promenade and I put flowers, dandelions with sculptures. I also did a pond, the ping pong table as a kind of fountain. You arrive to a fountain like if you were in a park. and many of my installations, even the Empty Club in '96, for example. There was a building in the center of London, and it was a landscape in 5 different floors with different type of always natural materials, meaning related with trees or plants, but also with the inner, let's say, the inner landscapes that are the board games that I show, or the billiard table that is also in this museum. So we have this change of scales in which the board game or the table or the things that we are having close to us, they are like micro landscapes, but not just landscape in the sense of a natural landscape. They are also landscapes or history, because these board games or these ping pong tables or sports, they are synthetical way of looking at that moment in history in which the ordering of landscape and the public space is made in relation with knowledge, technology, politics, and all that. So that's why we create chess, or we create billiards, or we create sports. They are all a micro representation of the social interaction and the historical moment that is living humanity at the time. So I was interested in using these micro landscapes in combination with the landscape of the show, but also transcending the space of the museum into the bigger landscape historically, geographically, and culturally. So all these scales, I tried to put them all in the work, in every exhibition.
And you work on all these different scales, really, from micro to macro. It's something Dan Graham once pointed out, and he said that, you know, because he worked in a less kind of a right form of scale, and he said that you work on so many different scales, and we're now going to jump, no, in terms of scale, because we talked about exhibitions, and we're now going to talk about Chapultepec, which is certainly your biggest project so far. It's an extraordinary story that the president commissioned you, and not an architect, and not an urban planner, as the director of this very big master plan. There have always been discussions, no, about actually artists coming into society. John Latham and Barbara Stevini, who were friends of mine in London, started the Artist Placement Group in the 60s, you know, and they basically said that every corporation, every government, every ministry should have an artist in residence or an artist in the board. We should bring art into society, and yet this remains kind of too rare until today, but here there is a case where this actually happened. Can you tell us how this all began, the beginning of Chapultepec?
The beginning of Chapultepec was very surprising for me, because they asked me, the Minister of Culture asked me to join in the project, to plan something for Chapultepec. We know the story here quite well now, but when the now 4th section, it was a military compound, and then it was was to become an ecological space and not another urban real estate speculation with buildings that are they were going to impact negatively the 4th section. They you know, they invite me to do the master plan, and I guess you know, sorry, I just remember a very funny story, because you know, Diego Rivera charged per mural 8 pesos per square meter, and I joked with the president, okay, and may I charge you 8 pesos per square meter in this mural? Of course, it was a joke, because I was not going to charge. But if it was to be charged like muralists were charging before, and I tell you, it's nothing. It was very cheap. Diego Rivera didn't live his life. He didn't pay his rent from the murals. He did a lot of them, but they was very, very inexpensive. He has to make portraits and other canvases to pay his rents, and the Anahuacalli, for example. Anyway, sorry, it was just an anecdote. So then when they invited me to do it, I guess that First of all, I thought that I could do it because not just because it was a great honor, but also because I think I have some elements that I could implement in the master plan for the garden, for the Chapultepec Park. And also I was not afraid of the scale because I think I knew it quite well, but also when I went to visit the fourth section, that was not possible to visit it before because it was a military compound, and analyzing the situation there, I thought that the potential was there. And also, of course, the idea was to make a very good team. Also, it's important to understand that I work with teams. I work alone in many aspects. I like to spend my day alone, working in my things, in my notebooks. But in the moment I start to work, I have very good teams. And I put together what I need to make a billiard table or a gallery or a museum show. And I think that's because I am a soccer player and it's a team sport. But anyway, then when we formed the team with different architects, with environmentalists, with engineers, then we start to develop the conceptual part of the project in the three levels we wanted to do: the environmental, the cultural, and the social. So we developed the strategies for the three layers, and then I hired a very good enterprise to make the budget very precise. So we did and planned the budget for the whole project, and we are not over budget, and we comply with the budget, and we are almost ready to inaugurate the project in the summer. It's in completion. So we are. It was strange that they asked me to do it. Probably it was strange that I accept to do it, but also the enthusiasm and the possibilities to do something like that, and that there was no imposition of any source. I could do every single idea as I wanted to propose it, and it was very good because, in muralism sometimes, like the famous anecdote of Diego Rivera has to erase his mural in the Rockefeller Foundation or the building because it was Lenin on it. So sometimes, if they commission murals, the artist has to erase some things because they are not. I didn't have that problem here. We made everything according to the master plan. I feel completely free to be creative and implement everything that our team together we thought that was a necessity and a good way to implement this public urban forest and a cultural space and open for everybody. So yes, it's something like that. It was too long, my answer?
No, it was a great answer, and actually the answer has to be long. Because as I told you, we spent 6 hours yesterday experiencing it, and if we would really discuss this project thoroughly, it would be a marathon. And we did actually do a marathon here with Eugenio at the museum many years ago, but I promised that this will not last 6 hours today, so we need shortcuts, and but we at the same time need long answers from you on this, because it's such a complex project. And I think what would be interesting somehow would be that you describe a little bit the sections, no? Because there is, of course, the first section where we began the tour yesterday, which you called the prehistoric section with the palace, and from there, we walked on.
Pre-Hispanic.
Yeah, exactly, and we went on a bridge, actually, on your bridge, the amazing bridge, which is both a sculpture, a functional bridge, and many other things, to the next section. I mean, what would be interesting is if you talk us maybe through these different sections, and then also the role the bridge plays in really creating access which before didn't exist, because it was not possible actually to access these different parts of the city.
Well, yes. The other reason why they decided to implement and to work in Chapultepec was because the presidential compound, the house of the presidents, until this new president, it was Los Pinos in a good chunk of the Chapultepec Park, and this Pinos area was became a kind of wall enclosed inside the park, And when they opened it up to the public, then everything became open for a possibility of more accessibility to that transition that was also caught by the periférico, the highway. So one of the main reasons to try to implement in the whole project was accessibility and communication for pedestrians and families internally in the park. So the first section, as you know, is the historical section, has been there since pre-Hispanic times because it used to be a spring and also was the door to the lake to arrive to the city of Tenochtitlan. So a lot of pilgrimage was coming through the hills of Chapultepec into what is now the Castillo de Chapultepec, and from there they will access to the city of Tenochtitlan. Then also when the Spaniards came in and they knew that the importance of that spring was fundamental for the surviving of the city, it became a very strategic point. And then also after the conquest became a kind of public space in terms of the water source was for all the city. So the first section is the oldest one, and it has been a natural preserved area since pre-Hispanic times. Second section is more like a modernist project after the developing of the Lomas de Chapultepec and all that area. There was second section is the mining. It was a mining for sand. There were also trees, and most of the wood of those trees were used to build up some of the houses in Colonia Roma, Colonia Roma, Condesa, and all that area close to the center. And after that became a mining area. That's why it's an area that is full of holes. It was totally deforested for many years. And at some point they decided to make the water tanks that we have there. So all the water coming from the Cutzamala, from all the areas coming into the city was reserved in these water tanks and in the lakes. Sorry, I don't have a map of the Chapultepec, but it's too long, my answer. But anyway, let's go to the second section, and then we go. The third section became, at some point, was planned to be developed as a residential area, part of the Lomas de Chapultepec development plan, but then they stopped it and became a national park, let's say. But they planted a lot of eucalyptus, was a mono-cultivated area, and over time, because this was around the 40s, 50s, but over time became very dry and they started to die, and it was abandoned somehow, still preserved as a kind of green area, but with serious problems of water and maintenance. In that third section, we also have the first civilian cemetery of Mexico, because it was founded by a man who couldn't bury his wife because she was not Catholic. And at the time, the cemeteries were all under the care of the Catholic Church. So this person bought that piece of land and made a first civil cemetery. It's called Panteón de Dolores, and that is during the Benito Juárez time, and it's part of now of the cultural implementation we are doing now. So hopefully next year when you come back, you can visit the cemetery, which is like, or Père Lachaise is a very important cemetery. And then, the third section, then we have to make the transition until the fourth section, which I said before was a military compound.
And there was a plan for a luxury apartment, and that
yes.
you got rid of that, and it's something different.
Well, not me, the president. And then the military were happy to join the project. And because, old Chapultepec has been, strategically speaking, part of our history of invasions and war and protection since colonial times. So the military, in a way, is a park that is, three times the size of Central Park, is in the center of the city, and also it has very historical moments related with wars, invasions, and all kind of things. So let's say our military history is involved in this complex.
And you also commission architecture, some through competition, through invitations. It's not all new buildings. I mean, as Peter Smithson once told me, in every master plan, the most important thing is that first we look at what is found, the as found, as he called it, in his collaboration with Alison Smithson. So there is, of course, a lot of things you found, but there is also new institutions. There's a whole cinema complex, and there is also an institution for storage. And I wanted to ask you to tell us about that, because it's an interesting thing that actually for a long time there have been reflections in relation to museums, how we could sort of do architecture for storage. Interesting example is the Charette building, the proposal of Rem Koolhaas and OMA for MoMA, which would have focused completely, on storage. And you create such a new institution, one can say, such a complex for storage. Can you tell us about these two new buildings we saw yesterday?
Yes, absolutely. One of we propose and we implement 12 spaces for cultural activities, and one of them is what we call today the Bodega Nacional de Museos, but I like Storage Institute is nice. That will be Instituto Bodega. I don't know. Anyway, we don't have still a name for it, but it's a storage facility that can be visited, that can hold exhibitions, but also at the same time can be an academy for restoration. Workshops is going to be implemented for students. Also, the National School of Arts can participate and have classes there, because it's very strange, but we have 2 schools of art in Mexico. And this is a parenthesis, but I think it's interesting, since the 90s that we start to grow artistically here, and there are many artists that they start to do quite interesting work. Funny enough, the art academies have been growing or decreasing in its size and its potential. And one of them is La Esmeralda, which is, I think, from many artists that they want to get into the school, they have no access and they have to reject a lot of artists. I think it's almost like 80% of the applications of the School of Arts are rejected. In a country that has a boom in art, that is developing a lot of new talents, and in the school, they are rejecting 80% of the applications. So it's not good. So the idea of this Institute of Storage is to make the storage facilities a workshop, and a place that is not just like an enclosed area, but that you can develop interaction with the public. You can also host private collections, which in Mexico we have many, and they are still in their houses. I mean, 3rd generation houses, they are still there, and they don't know what to do with them. Of course, we have someone like Eugenio Lopez, before he falls asleep, that is doing with his collection such a public apportation to the life in Mexico. But a lot of, and this is, a new generation of entrepreneur in Mexico, but before that, when our parents were young and collecting or making art, they didn't know what to do after they got old, and they didn't know where to put the things. So I think we managed to do installation that will host and will keep implementing the new activities in relation with our patrimony, because it can host archaeology and old art from old all the time from the collection of the state, and then also the new collectors and the people, the young people can come and visit, and the old people like me can go and enjoy some of our storage facilities.
Now, for some of these buildings, you invited architects. Marisa Rocha, we saw the buildings yesterday. Then there were competition. But you told me yesterday that you didn't invite architects if an artist can do it, as a kind of a principle. And that brings us, of course, to the bridge. And the extraordinary Calzada flotante, the floating causeway, it's one of 3 bridges. It's the realized one, and there's 2 more planned. It's really this bridge which creates in this project, or through this project, the largest cultural recreation space, one, I would say, of the largest in the world. It's 2 or 3 times bigger than Central Park. It sort of is an essential aspect now of this project, the bridge. Can you tell us a little bit about the genesis of this bridge and how you designed it? Because it's a sculpture, it's at the same time functional, and it's deeply related, of course, to this idea that you didn't want to eliminate trees, but add trees.
Yes, there were there were many moments in that peripheral area in which, by the way, it used to be a very beautiful Candela bridge a long time ago when the peripheral was smaller. It was a very nice Candela bridge. I remember seeing it when I was a kid. But then, you know, the city grew, and then you have the second floor of the highway in the peripheral, and it was very difficult to cross. So families, pedestrians, cyclists was really very hard. And then I saw some of the proposals that were done a few years ago, and they were a bit difficult to make. So then I start to look for ways to cross at level so that we don't need to go up and then down, which is something we don't want to do. And I found 3 lines, 3 possibilities. And then I started to work with a group of, a couple of architects, and then to see how we can cross but also not damage the trees and make a structure that can generate a chain of developing a path for pedestrians and cyclists, but also through the trees. So at the end, I end up drawing with my regular system of circles and open and closed spaces and a kind of connection of chains and exponential circuits, arches and discs, a kind of chain that could go through the trees and connect the first section and second section. And we planned 3 of them, and we are doing, the second one is almost finished, but then third one was not necessary at the end because we are doing the teleférico, is a cablebus, so you can cross it easily with that. So we didn't need to spend on that one. Also, and I like to think about this in relation with the memory of the Chapultepec Park, because it's the arches, the system of arches and circles is connected with you feel that you are walking inside the park, but also there is some memory related not just with nature and the legs of the bridge that is very close to the trees. It looks like a trunk of a tree. But also, we remember that Chapultepec was full of aqueducts. Aqueducts, the water lines made by Spaniards and still they have many in Spain, also obviously Roman aqueducts. But we have our share of aqueductos in Chapultepec Park. So in a way, this is just following old tradition of lines of water running through the Chapultepec Park towards the city. So I think it was important to start to make more fluid the connectivity inside the park, so we could, as an ecosystem, make the connection of the living beings that were using this space. That is too long, no?
No, it's beautiful. Thank you. But I have more questions because, in a way, it brings us also to the question, of course, we could talk more about the circles because the circles are always there. At some point, I ask you if the circles are a personified abstraction, but of course aren't because you work on so many other things. But there is an eternal return, in a way, of the circles. And you told me once that very early on, when you were a kid, you have drawn circles. You have drawings from when you were 12 years old, right? When you drew circles. So the circles were always there.
Yeah, I was at the beginning, very young. Yeah.
But one thing I wanted to kind of ask you is, because that was also striking yesterday, that we kept coming back also in the conversation about the human body. I mean, even on the scale of this gigantic project, you always refer to the body. You make analogies to the arteries of the park. You talk about the lungs. You talk about irrigation, where the blood, in a way, is the water. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that idea also of the entire project being a kind of a body? It is also, in a way, an organic project. I mean, I think it's interesting right now that we can see more and more artists working on longer durational projects. I just spoke to Inka Jonibare, who started a farm project, in Nigeria, which is an organically evolving kind of, farm project, which is at the same time an artist residency. Lauren Halsey in Los Angeles works on an urbanistic project, which, it's a project for many decades. So it seems to me that at this moment in time, there is a sort of idea, maybe, or a desire, maybe more than an idea, a desire of artists to go beyond short-termism. No? That idea of event culture, of the duration of exhibition, and to maybe make work which has more to do with longue durée. I don't know in English, long duration?
Duration.
Yeah, long durational work, to use that notion.
Larga duración.
Exactly. And I think in a way, this project we saw yesterday is an organism. It's a long durational project. It's also, it continues to evolve. As you say, there are going to be, many more elements to come. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's not an easy answer for this because it's true that when you are working or interested in the different scales or different sizes of projects, that they also that has to do with also time, and sometimes time. When you are interested in time, you are interested in not just the duration of the production of the work and how you are living it, how long is going to last a small gesture or a big building. And sometimes, a big building can be very long to build, and then at the moment it's finished, it's almost kind of dead looking. And then sometimes you do something small, and then it lasts for a very long time because it's something that people want to preserve. Happens with painting, but happens also with our relationship with the objects of art and public spaces that we are preserving or living, and how long we want them to live for. So, when I guess artists are interested in the public sphere in a way, and you want to establish communication with people in different ways, you cannot leave everything to the communication that you establish through shows or galleries or museums. You have to develop teams, you have to develop friends and colleagues to exchange and generate different projects that sometimes they have to be outside the institutions and outside the governments. Because also it's not through government or money that you can do a lot of communication with people, right? So I guess, for example, the South London Gallery Garden, I was invited to do that exhibition, that garden in London, in the south part of London, because it was an important community garden for the neighbors, for the visitors. It was not just a kind of sculptural garden for an institution. It was a garden that has to work for the everyday life. And that's why, well, I accept to do it. Also, I didn't charge for that project because it was important, because they did not have the money to pay for, you know, if you charge per square meter, like the muralists did. So I did it, and it's working well. It's a community space inside this great South London garden. It's a public gallery. It's not a gallery in London. Is normally is public, not just private. So it's a public space, and honestly, I don't know how long it's going to last, but it's working well. And then, yes, when also I am very much aware that the Chapultepec project is an ongoing project and is going to be changing. So we are not sure what will happen with the bridge or the other parts that we are doing now, because as a garden, it's changing all the time. So I think it's more about evolution and evolving. At the end, most of the works are evolving anyway. Sometimes not so much physically. Maybe a painting looks almost the same for 500 years. But the way we look at that painting has changed so much that we have no idea how the people were looking at this same painting 500 years ago, because we change anyway. So that same object, even if it's intact, which rarely is, the way we are looking at that same object is completely different. So the changes are so much in all levels in terms of time, durability, evolution or evolving, that probably the physical aspect of durability is the least important. It's more important how our brains, our society are evolving, and how we perceive a landscape, how we perceive a forest today, how we perceive a mural or a sculpture today. So for sure we need to be interested in those evolving aspects of the work and the processes that the work starts to generate, because it's the beginning always of something that is going to change unpredictably.
Thank you. Now I was thinking, for those who haven't seen the garden in London, it's maybe important to describe this a little bit more, because there is, similarly to what you said about the bridge, there is the circle, there is the flow, but it has to do...
There are some photos in there.
Yeah, I think you have some photos in the presentation. There is the door swing, really, which, as far as I understand, it's the door swing which sort of generates the circle. Can you talk about that? And
the door wing.
Yeah, the door wing, door swing, what is it in English? Yeah, the door wing.
The door that opens.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to explain, but it's just that it was a door that was opening very big into the garden, and it was leaving a mark in the floor. So I start to do the tracing of the garden based on that mark of the door opening, and just develop the rings in relation with that accident. So, as you say, this is the garden, yeah, with the bricks. This is the drawing of the garden, and then you have the doors. That is, that's a long yellow hose in the Santa Fe Museum. That is the island into an island in New York. And that is the bridge here in Mexico. So, yeah, I forgot. I was going to say something that I didn't answer one of your questions. It was
About the garden.
Pre-existence, yes. So it was very important for the Chapultepec Garden, being such an important historical park, to be very much aware of the conditions and the historical things, but also the, let's say, non-historical things, but they were part of the history of this park. So that's why we developed the parkour in the former water tanks of entertaining water park, and we developed skateboard bowls in the swimming pools of the dolphins in another water entertaining park, which obviously went bankrupt, but also just to think about all this infrastructure for such an politically incorrect treat of animals and water, because they were really wasting a lot of water. But nevertheless, the impact was there, and we saw the opportunity for various reasons. One is that it's more expensive sometimes to demolish and take out the debris of a construction and to make another construction. Of course, it's worth it if you have to take it out and plant some trees, yes. But if it's already there, sometimes it's ecologically more efficient, thinking in permacultural terms, to use that already impacted area to regenerate the hydration, the water use, and the activities, the human activities in this environment. So we were very much aware, and it's not so easy this, because I think the world of cultural events and ecological events is still too far apart. I think we need to make it even closer in terms of those type of recycling and redeveloping of environmental implementations in the production, distribution, and consumption of artworks. And that's why in Chapultepec, the pre-existence or the things that they were found there, but not just in terms of urban infrastructure, but also in terms of natural resources and human potential, human sources, was very important to develop most of the, let's say, designs, because I also don't like to talk about architectural landscape, because that for me is a contradiction in terms. We should talk about design of landscapes, landscape design, and in any case, engineering landscape, because to design a landscape, you need to make very serious green engineering structures. So it has very little to do with architecture, in fact. It's more about design, engineering, in terms of landscape design and production, has more to do with engineering than with architecture. So that's why but you can say that it was also a recovering of a park by an artist doing a kind of public sculpture in the parkour using a ruin, but also, and as you know, ruins are a very important aspect of Mexican culture, but also of my work. I love to work with this sense of ruin that keeps being a ruin, but somehow is still alive for other reasons. So it's not a machine, but it's still a machine functioning, although it's kind of a ruin, like La Dehese, or an archaeological object, like La Dehese, the car. You can say it's urban archaeology, that. But what we did in Chapultepec is also urban archaeology, because we were not just discovering objects from the pre-Hispanic times. Quite surprisingly, and very old, we discovered quite a few things. But also we were exploring, like archaeology, like urban archaeology, all the implementations of urban and architectural implementations over 100 years. At least, because also the gunpowder factory is from 17th century. And it was gunpowder factory used in different parts of our history. So we have, from pre-Hispanic times until today, all these layers in the Chapultepec Park. And we try to work with all of them. And they are all still alive, because they are now functioning again in a different way, but they are functioning again. That was a bit too long too, no?
This could be a wonderful conclusion, actually. I do, however, have two last questions, because I thought, we started with the micro and then went into the macro. And in this conversation, I quoted initially Benjamin Buchloh did with you at the Guggenheim. you both discuss about the micro and the macro, and basically Benjamin says that there is a duality in your work of the macro and the micro structure, no? If you think about how the work operates. And what is so fascinating to me is that whilst you work on this macroscopic project we've now been experiencing yesterday and listening to you today, at the same time, you worked on a very microscopic project, which is the Diario de Planto. Some pages from this diary are exhibited right now in your exhibition at Curimansuto, which opened yesterday. And many of these works are actually not bigger than the palm of the hand. There are imprint and sketches of leaves. It's again an organic growth, but it's in a way maybe a cartography there of an organic growth. And you started this diary, as you told me at the time when we did this Zoom interview during the lockdown. You were in Tokyo, I was in London, and you started this diary during the pandemic in Tokyo. You found leaves, and then this little diary traveled with you. It traveled with you to Mexico when you worked on the project here, and you continued. So I wanted to ask you to tell us about this diario and about this idea of making a kind of a cartography of these plants, and it's almost like plant thinking.
The plant thinking, yes. Well, you describe it exactly like that. I started to, when I started the project in Chapultepec, we formed different teams and working with environmentalists and with people about all the different species for the forest and all that. I just, learn a lot. At the same time, in my work, I have always been fascinated with trees, with plants. There are a lot of sculptures. They are built up as structures that are more vegetal than architectural, let's say. So, yes, doing this diary of plants, and I guess because Chapultepec was so complex, I couldn't go back to my notebook and write my Bitacora or diary of the day because I was exhausted. So then I started to do this kind of vegetative state, drawing through the leaves of the plants and flowers, imprinting them. Sorry, we don't have pictures of that here, but it's in the exhibition if you want to see it. And then I end up doing many notebooks, I think 24, and 700 pages of imprints, and also ink, and I was scribbling, bubbling, printing, but trying to write without making any sense, because it was all like, as I say before, a kind of vegetative state, which is obviously nothing recommended, but in a way, plants and the perception of life to think that we are plants, or how plants will be communicating or thinking or moving, migrating, is a nice thing to think. And I was just trying to do my Diario de Plantas as an everyday life companion to my lockdown and my Chapultepec project. And that's, I end up.
And anyway, it's much better to go and see the work, so it isn't a problem. We have images because you can all, for those of you who haven't seen it, you can see the exhibition. I have one last question, but before that, I just wanted to thank again David and Eugenio, because it is absolutely magical to do a conversation in this space, and it's incredible, the institution you created, and I think we should all give you both a very big round of applause. Bravo. And there could really not be a better context to talk about public space with Gabriel than this lecture room here. My last question, Gabriel, is the only question which is recurrent in all our conversation ever since 1993 when we started this infinite conversation 30 years ago. I've always ended by asking you about the unrealized project. And I think it's really interesting how little we know about artists' unrealized projects. We know a lot about architects' unrealized projects because architects publish them. It's very often also part of the competitions, of architectural competition, that they get published. But even the most well-known artists whose work is completely published, we know very little about unrealized projects. And at the beginning, in the 90s, when we started to collaborate, I did a book called Unbuilt Roads. It was kind of with Guy Tortosa connected to Caspar Koenig's Münster project about unrealized projects of artists, unrealized public art, and you actually contributed your house project to that. And of course, that has now been realized, so it's no longer an unrealized project. But of course, there is such a wide range, you know, of what the unrealized project of an artist can be. There are projects which are maybe too big to be realized, maybe also just unrealizable. I mean, Sia Ahmadjani wanted to build a sculpture from the Earth to the moon. That was an unrealizable project. Some projects are too expensive to be realized. Some are also too small to be realized. Silvio Meireles wanted to always have a tiny little cube in a museum, and the entire museum would have to be empty. So, you know, it took 30 years for a museum to finally agree to do that. Then some projects would be easy to realize if only the world had known. You know, Louis Bourgeois wanted to design a beautiful little amphitheater. I still regret that that was never built because, you know, no one knew. Then some projects are too time intense. Friederike Mayraker, the poet and writer, when she was 97, told me that she has another century of literature to write, so there's an issue of time, you know. Then some projects are censored. Censorship can be a reason for a project being unrealized. And then, of course, there is also what Doris Lessing told me. I think many of us have projects which are unrealized because we maybe haven't dared to do them. So Doris Lessing said this would be self-censor projects. Like, I always wanted to write a novel, but I think it would be very embarrassing, so I've never done it. No? So that's an unrealized project. So I wanted to end, as always, with the question to you to tell us about an unrealized, or some of your unrealized projects.
I told you, I asked you not to ask me this question, because he always asks me this, and I always get in trouble because I'm terrible for this, you know, I'm very bad. Let's say I'm very bad utopical artist or something like that. Maybe it's because I cannot foresee the future for things I want to do next, because I am always thinking in that morning, in a way. You know, I try to just that morning wake up and do something that I have to do or I feel like doing. So a lot of the, you know, the project of the house, for example, when we published that project, I have it in my notebook for already, what year was that book?
The book came out in 97 for Münster?
In 97, so it has 2 years in my notebook, because I did the drawing in a trip to India in 95. And then I ended up building that house. Yes, I did spend 10 years in designing the house, because I was drawing on my notebook and measuring. I went back to measure again the observatory in Jantar Mantar. So it was my own archaeological trip. And then I found the space in 2004, and it took me 2 years to build that house as an observatory in the coast of the Pacific. It was finished in 2006. But then, you know, I did not want to make more houses. I didn't want to then, now let's do another one. Or I just finished that cycle. It was a 10-year cycle, and I was happy with that. Then, of course, Chapultepec was not in my dream. But of course, when I start to do it, and I know it's going to be unrealized things, but I think it's not me who has to realize them. I think also in the art, a lot of the work has to be realized by the spectators, by the collectors, by the public, who is going to realize the most important part of an artwork is to be realized by the people. And then it's very hard for me to think in an unrealized project.
But you told me yesterday first not to ask the question, but then you actually did start to talk about an unrealized project, and it had to do with, it had to do with kind of grants for younger artists. I love that idea.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's an unrealized project. I want to think in a grant for people who want to live abroad for 1 year or 2, out of her own context, and just to move like I did at some point, and then to make this public grant. Applications are welcome. And we do, we can do that. That is true. I told you that. And My wife, Maria, is smiling because she's the first one who every morning tells me, when are we doing these grants? So the idea is that you give the grant to a person who wants to live 1 year abroad, doing whatever they want, just to have the distance that sometimes is required from your own life and culture and country to see it again and enjoy it back.
It's a beautiful,
if you ever come back.
It's a beautiful idea. There could not be a better conclusion. Gabriel, thank you so much. Thank you all.